Hello and welcome to Short Bites, a Stephen King podcast. I am your host, Jason White, and today I have Ian Rogers with me to discuss I Am the Doorway from Night Shift. And Ian, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm well. Thanks for having me back. I think this is my third visit now.
Well, this is a different podcast, so this is your
Different podcast,
first here, but it's the third time we've talked on a podcast. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Can you give yourself an introduction?
Yeah. My name's Ian Rogers. I'm a horror writer from Canada. I'm the author of the collection Every House is Haunted, which is the thing that probably most people know me for. It was optioned by Sam Raimi, who's currently developing a film adaptation of one of the stories in the book, The House on Ashley Avenue, which was also a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award. So I'm pretty proud of that because
Yeah.
I love that story and I love that award. So I'm a big Shirley Jackson fan. So any award associated with her is one I'm proud to be nominated for. I'm also the author of the novel Family, which was out from Earthling Publications last year, and the novella Grey, which was sort of a angels and demons set against an apocalyptic noir setting that was from PS Publishing. And I'm also the author of Sycamore, which is the first novel in the Blackland series, which is sort of a supernatural noir series that I've been writing actually for several years now in short stories and novellas. This was the first novel launching the series, and that also came out last year.
Awesome. Now, just before we hit record, you were saying you had a story about Sam Raimi while you were talking with him that relates to Night Shift. Can you tell us what that story is?
Oh yeah, I was Sam and I had a Zoom chat. It was a couple years ago now, and really nice guy. And he just one of the first things he said to me was how much he loved the book Every House is Haunted, and said that he hadn't been that impressed by a collection of horror fiction since Stephen King's Night Shift. Of course, I did not believe him at all. I thought he's a very nice guy.
Yeah.
But I thought, you know what? I'm gonna at least for the duration of this phone call or the Zoom call, I'm gonna believe him. So I'm just gonna live in the reality where, in at least Sam Raimi's mind, I'm there right with Stephen King. You
know? Think of it this way: he didn't have to say that, right?
Yes. And that's what I also said. That's what I said. My wife was actually listening to us chat in the other room because, of course, she was very excited about the chat. And she said the same thing. It was just like, I'm not anyone that he has to sort of grease up or lie to. I'm just some writer in Canada. Yeah. No,
speaking of
that guy.
Yeah. Speaking of House on Ashley Avenue and that adaptation, has there been any update? Last time I talked to you, you said there was going to be an update soon. Have you received an update? Is it still moving ahead?
Yeah, it's still moving ahead. The funny thing is I get updates and then I never really know which ones I'm allowed to sort of talk about because it's sort of like, obviously these things are secret. And I'm not talking in like a non-disclosure agreement sort of way. It's just sort of like the meetings and the stuff that go on behind the scenes. You don't really talk about them because you just don't, right? So it's kind of like that insider's knowledge. It's nothing any really too secretive. But all I can say is it's definitely still moving ahead. They're sort of in the phase of talking with actors right now, which I'm really excited to hear about because it's something that I've thought a lot about, and I don't really think about it too much in terms of who would be playing the two leads because I don't want to get too attached to anyone, and because also since I'm still writing the rest of the stories with these characters, I also don't really want to get that set in my mind, especially if certain actors that they're speaking to don't have being attached to the project. So maybe once someone's been cast, and that might change how I feel. It's kind of like if I go back and reread The Stand these days. I can't read it now without thinking of the actors from the miniseries in the 90s.
Yeah, me too. Like Gary Sinise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he's great. I mean, there's some, my wife loves the Stand miniseries. I think it's good for a '90s television miniseries. I thought it definitely has its moments. And then so that's sort of how I feel with the cast. I think there's some highs and lows there, and then nothing really awful. It's an ensemble, right? So there's going to be some people who I feel were really perfectly cast and others less so. Mm-hmm. But I've always really liked Gary Sinise, and yeah, when I picture Stu Redman, it's Gary
Sinise. Yeah, me too.
Dan,
as we mentioned in the beginning here, I've had you on the Weird Reads podcast a couple of times, and And that was a lot of fun. It's always fun talking to you, Ian. But we discussed the first time and the second time even a little bit. We discussed your most recent release, Sycamore,
Mhm.
which I think is a fun book to read. And I think, honestly, I think Stephen King readers might enjoy it too. Do you care to reiterate what what Sycamore is about?
Yeah, it's a Sycamore is a sort of a supernatural mystery about a private investigator named Felix Wren who investigates supernatural cases in a world where monsters and stuff just exist, and they've existed since around the 1940s when these portals started popping up all over the world, and they all open onto the same place, which is this dark dimension that lies right next to ours called the Blacklands.
Mhm.
And they call it the Blacklands because there's no sun over there. It's a world of perpetual night, and it's basically filled with every single supernatural creature that you can imagine, as well as a whole bunch you can't imagine, stuff that we don't really have names for. And it was just my way of sort of saying, you know, I wanted this character to be able to investigate vampires and werewolves and ghosts, and then also allow myself the license to come up with all kinds of my own monsters, stuff
Yeah.
that would be original, which I thought would just be a really cool way of balancing the things people would expect and then the unexpected. So it's not just going to be, oh, is this going to be a vampire novel, or is this one going to be a werewolf novel? Oh, this is going to be something new. This is going to be something that the characters are encountering for the first time. And for a world building way, I thought that was also kind of good as well, because it means the characters themselves are kind of always off balance. There's as much as they know about the Blacklands, there's all the stuff that they don't know. So
Mhm.
it keeps that element of mystery and that element of fear always there. So as comfortable as the people in this world are with the Blacklands, um, they're still very much afraid of it because there's always stuff there that they've never seen before. So creatively, it's a lot of fun to write. It's something that I keep going back to. I write these standalone stories as well, 2 standalone books, but I keep going back to the Blacklands. I just finished the Blacklands collection, these two novellas. I don't know if it'll be the next Blacklands book, but I just wanted to get it off my plate, so I sent it to my agent and said, "Here it is, it's done." And it's two stories featuring a different character, a different recurring character named Jerry Baldwin, who he's actually a friend of Felix. He sells haunted houses for a living.
Mm.
And it was just my idea that in this world, you would have different people and their jobs might directly connect with the supernatural. So in a world where haunted houses exist, you would have people who would sell them. So what kind of person would that be? What kind of person would want to buy a haunted house is something that I like to explore. I like the supernatural aspects and the fantastic aspects of this world, but I also try to make them very pragmatic and realistic. Like, what would it really be like to live in a world where these things exist? So these two novellas in this collection, one of them is it's called "Possession is 9/10 the Law," and again, all these the Jerry Baldwin stories are usually very real estate themed. So that's why it's got a real estate themed title. And the second one is a much longer story. It's a 30,000 word novella, and it's called Much Ado About Snuffing. It's about snuff tapes. He finds these supernatural snuff tapes in a house that he's getting ready for sale. So I kind of just put those two together in a collection, and I titled it "If You Died Here, You'd Be Home by Now." Which is just a play on those billboards that you would see advertising condos in downtown cities that said, "If you lived here, you'd be home by now." So in a supernatural world where you're selling haunted houses, I thought it would be a fun play on words and kind of drives home that kind of dark, almost comedic aspect that are the Jerry Baldwin stories, which tend to be a little bit lighter than the Felix stories. I wouldn't say funny because nothing's really funny about this world, but I like the fact that even in my Blacklands universe, the stories tonally can be very different. It's not just a matter of you having a different character that you're following. I can tell even different types of stories in this world.
Is that so? That's called "If You Died Here, You'd Be Home by Now."
Yeah.
I love that. I
Yeah.
just want to write it down so that I remember it, because I'm gonna get that.
Well, it was funny because it was a title I was struggling to come up with. I was looking for real estate lingo and seeing how could I change this? How can I put in a monster or a supernatural angle? And I was rereading because Andrew Piper had passed away a few months ago, and he was a friend of mine. He actually was the very first person who ever blurbed my book. He was the first person who blurbed Every House is Haunted and was on the cover of the original edition. I was so proud of that, and he was so gracious to do that for me. And I remember when we were hanging out one time, I said, "If this is the only book I ever publish, at least I'll always have your blurb on the cover." And he was really, really kind, a very, very nice man. It was just so devastating when he was gone. So I went back and I was rereading his very first collection, Kiss Me. and he's got a story in there called "If You Lived Here, You'd Be Home by Now." And I forgot about that, and so it was like boom, that was the connection, and it was just, and it's about, you know, that line, that story title is about a real estate billboard that this character sees in the story, and it just came in and it said, "Oh, if you died here, you know, if you were trying to sell a haunted house, that's what you would say." So it was sort of, again, the way that in my world I just take normal things and I dip them in the supernatural, and it was just it was perfect. So yeah, I owe that one to Andrew for sure.
Yeah, and may he rest in peace.
Absolutely.
I didn't even know he was sick, but he apparently passed away from an illness, correct?
Yeah, he died of cancer. I didn't know either. He was very private with it. And I hadn't seen him. I think even for me, I haven't really been out to a lot of events since the pandemic, and I don't think I even saw him. We talked about it, and I figured I'd just bump into him anyway at one of the events in Canada, and then he was just gone. You know, it was devastating. It was eye opening because he wasn't very old. He's just such a nice guy, and it's just one of these things that just tells you that it can happen to any of us, right? Mm-hmm. So it's don't take these things for granted. You know, my friend Craig Davidson, a really good friend of mine, wrote this wonderful piece for him. It was just talking about relationships with men and how we don't really, we're basically told not to express your feelings, even to each other. So he and Andrew were making an effort of saying that they love each other. Hey man, when they would say, "Hey, I love you, talk to you later," and it was just something that would really resonate with me, because I don't really go in for a lot of that alpha male stuff. I'm pretty emotional. I'm pretty open with my stuff. But even for me, I don't say that stuff to my friends. So when I spoke with people afterwards, it was just like, yeah, we need to do better. You know, we need to, especially these days when the world is sort of dark with what's going on everywhere. It's like more than ever now, because you just don't know what's going to happen to your people around you. I want my people to know how much they mean to me. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. Nothing is permanent, but we sometimes fall into a feeling that it's not that we sit here and think it's going to last forever. It just doesn't cross our minds that this will one day end.
It's a routine, and it's normal. I mean, you get into a steady routine, and the problem is that when you're in a routine, it can become a rut really quickly. You don't know it's insidious that way. Yeah. And it's suddenly like, oh no, I'm trapped in this thing, and I didn't realize that I was in this kind of this stagnancy. And I just don't want to be that way. You know, it's just become with the work. I want to get these stories out now while I'm able to. I want to do the things with my wife and have these adventures and do these things, as opposed to saying we'll do that one day. It's just no regrets, man. You know, no sitting on my butt watching TV all day or playing video games. I'm still going to do those things, just less. You know? Yeah, it's not about living like a monk. You know, again, there's everything in moderation. But I need to make a bigger effort to do these other things and to tell these people, you guys matter to me. So Jason, you matter. You're a bud.
You matter to me too, buddy. Well, absolutely. You. All right. So how about we move on to some Stephen King questions here, because you're a brand new guest to the show, and this isn't your first time. Mm-hmm. You're going to be on again in the future, but for the first round, you always get this new guest questions, which are all like your Stephen King origin questions. So, how were you introduced to Stephen King?
This is a good question. This is why I'm perfect for this podcast. And again, it's probably the same for a lot of people. Let's face it, Stephen King casts a pretty big shadow, especially in the horror community. But Stephen King is the reason I write. I write anything. He's definitely the reason I write horror fiction. When I was a kid, my mom was the big horror influence. She loved horror movies and she loved horror books. So the horror books that were always lying around our house were Stephen King, Dean Koontz, and John Saul. That was the trifecta in our house. And Stephen King was the one I just gravitated to. There was these giant door stoppers of books, and my family, my parents were very much of the mind of, you can read what you want, you can watch what you want within reason, but if you have nightmares, you're cut off. You know, that was sort of the rule. You know, but especially with reading, they always encouraged it. You know, my dad never had much use for horror fiction. He was a big reader. You know, like my mom had Stephen King, and he had like Louis L'Amour and Ian Fleming and National Geographic magazines. We had stacks, like bookshelves of National Geographics, because he was a subscriber. So for me, that's where Stephen King came from. And I couldn't tell you what the very first Stephen King I read, and I probably skipped a lot of it. A lot of it went over my head because I was so young. but I remember, Stephen King is a very readable author. Like you don't have to have had a huge vocabulary, and I don't want to sound like he doesn't have one. Stephen King is very articulate and very intelligent, but there's an accessibility to his work that I think can largely explain why he's so successful.
Yeah.
It's not just that he writes scary stuff; he also writes really memorable characters. And even when I go back and I'm like, well, I'm going to go back and reread, say, like the Holland Tunnel scene from The Stand, because it's a really great scene. Suddenly, I'm rereading the whole book. Like you go back and it's just I can't go back without reading again. Like even my wife, who had never really read Stephen King before we met, he's like one of her favorite authors. She loves Bag of Bones. She likes when I read to her. So Bag of Bones was one of the very first books I read to her when we were dating, and she's reread it herself now many times. He's the kind of author that he makes it really easy for you to want to go back and reread.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Stephen King is a weird writer in that, as you said, he's kind of like a user-friendly, almost anyone can read him type of author. But when you really dig into his prose, you notice just how complex his prose is, and how beautiful it can be. And it's incredible that he can do that.
Yeah, I think he's very, very insightful, and it's funny because he's obviously he writes really scary scenes, but I don't think he gets enough credit for writing really, really good people. Like I think his characters,
Yeah.
I'm not talking his monsters, I'm talking like his regular characters, like someone like Stu Redman in The Stand. This is a guy, and I remember his background in the book. I vividly remember this is a guy who he's just a regular dude working at I think it was a calculator factory in Arnett, Texas. He was, and again, it's something that's not even mentioned. I don't think it's mentioned in either of the film adaptation or the television adaptations, but he was married and his wife had died. Like he had a whole life before the plague, and when he met Franny and all this stuff. There's a lot more complexity to this character, and I think that was something that Stephen King was really, for a guy who wrote as much as he did, like really huge books, he could still really get character across very, very quickly. Like he didn't spend 50 pages writing about Stu Redman. He wrote 3 or 4 because he's got a huge cast to introduce. But in those 3 or 4 pages, you know everything about this guy, and you feel like you know him. So I think that was something that King is just really good. He knows his monsters, but even more, he knows people.
Absolutely. Yeah, King is a master at crafting characters. It's like because like you just said, he creates characters. He creates people that you know or have known, and that's an incredible thing. Like he's also very good at capturing all these little weird details, things that we notice but don't necessarily pay attention to, and I love that in his writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, devil's in the details, right? And that's
Yeah.
the funny thing is, like obviously he writes a lot of devils and a lot of monsters, but the details are in ordinary people too, and those are those little nuances that make the characters feel human. You humanize them. They're not perfect. They've got their little idiosyncrasies, but those are the things you remember about people.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us aspire to be like that, but it's hard. I don't know how his brain works.
It's very deceptive. It's like when you look at the old noir guys like Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett, who wrote like the early detective fiction that's been mimicked and parodied to this day. It's a style that looks deceptively easy, but then when you try to do it, it's hard. Like even for me as a writer who I've written detective fiction and horror fiction, and I've also tried to meld the two with the Felix Wren stories and the Blackland series. It's hard, man. Like it's just like it should be easy in the sense that you're having a good time, but anything that's difficult requires work and effort, and that's what you want to do. You want to do something that is enjoyable. You don't want it to read like work, because if it reads like work, no one's going to want to read it. Right?
Yeah. So do you have a favorite King novel?
Ooh, favorite King novel? That's tough. I love it. Like I think for me, it is just, I think it really is about the magic of childhood and what remains as you get older. Like a bit of it is there. You can revisit that. You can channel that to a certain degree. I think that there's a lot of really cool things in there. And obviously he tried to put every monster he could come up with in there. And then when, of course, you got this giant spider at the end. I mean, I'm terrified of spiders. So for me, it was just like, it really fired on all cylinders. I love that book. A lot of people cite The Stand. It's a great book. But for me, it's just because of the scenes with the kids and then seeing them as adults. And maybe it's me growing up. I'm 48. I'm going to be 49 in October. It's that sort of awareness, that sense of mortality and the things that you can sort of, you can still maybe see about yourself as a kid, but other things you've lost and are never going to get back. Um, those parts probably speak to me even more now when I revisit that novel and go back and look back at it and like, oh yeah, this guy's bald, this guy's out of shape. It's like
Yeah.
I resonate with that stuff a lot more now.
Yeah, absolutely. But nobody captures childhood like Stephen King does, even if you didn't have a very uh, not necessarily a similar childhood,
Mhm.
but there's some stuff in there that a lot of people find and relate to. Like I can relate to the kids in it, but I didn't have like some of the crazy bullies that were in
Right.
that book. I had bullies, of course, but they never went that far.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, that's why it's scary, right? I think the town of Derry is really haunted. So, like, yeah, would Henry Bowers have been as bad as he was if he was in another place? Because again, the idea is that its presence is amplifying all of the negativity in this town. So
yeah,
that's something that, and again, like King does nostalgia, but I think he does it right. He's not trying to put on these rose tinted glasses and say everything was really great, especially in it. But I think that's why it resonates with people. He's not trying to say everything was better when you were a kid. He's saying lots of stuff were better, and you were youthful, so you had a lot of expectation, a lot of hope for the future, and that's all he's saying. Because yeah, these kids went through a lot of hell. Even if
mhm.
there wasn't this killer clown, Henry Bowers is in some ways worse than Pennywise, because Pennywise pops up every 30 years. Henry Bowers you got to deal with every day at school.
Yeah, and it's literal war in
Yeah,
some cases with this guy.
yeah. The
Yeah,
apocalyptic rock fight. Yeah, that's
yeah.
right.
Do you have a least favorite novel by
Ooh,
King?
that's a good question, because yeah, obviously I don't like everything. I'm trying to think of what was one, like a novel.
Yeah,
Ooh, it didn't really resonate with me. You know what? It's funny because I love all the music references, but actually Christine I think was one that I felt like it would have made a better short story or even like a novella. But I thought for the length that it was, which is basically it's a haunted car that drives over people. It was
mhm.
not a book that I just kept waiting for it to end. It was like how they going to kill this haunted car. But again, I still read it. I liked the characters. I liked the vibe that it had. But for me, maybe it's because I'm also not a car guy. Like I'm one of these. I'm a
Yeah,
guy, but I'm like I don't care about cars. I couldn't tell
yeah,
you that
me
much
too,
about
honestly.
cars. So maybe that's another reason why I didn't really care about
No,
Christine.
you know what? Christine is a weird book. It's written. A lot of people say Tommy Knockers is a mess, but I think
Mhm.
Christine is a bit of a bigger mess because we switch point of views, not point of views, but first person to third
Yep.
person. Uh, and it does that three times, and you can kind of see why, but I think King may have wrote himself into a corner and didn't know how to get out of it, and so
Mhm.
he just switced tenses, right? So
Yep. Well, and I
not
remember
tenses,
that
but
you mentioned that
perspective.
that was something that I found jarring as well too. And I just remember the ending. I mean, like spoiler alert for a book that was written 40 years ago, but like and people who might just remember the movie, which is not how the book ends. The book just ends. He gets like a crusher, and then he just rams the car over and over again until like it's pretty anticlimactic when you think that's the buildup is that he finds or he rents or borrows some guy's like wrecker and just
Yeah,
drives into the car over and over again. Like that's it. And of course, there's this stinger that the car might not be dead; it might be rebuilding itself. But at that point, I was just like, yeah, I don't care.
yeah,
I mean, again, let's just like then move into an apartment. It's not going to get you in the apartment. It's not going to drive up the elevator. So it's just as a villain, it just the haunted car didn't do anything for me, which is funny because a lot of people sort of draw that comparison to From a View Agate. Oh, it's another car book. It's like they couldn't be more different. Like
yeah,
that just tells me people who've never read either book. It's just like the car in From a View Agate has got nothing to do. It's not a possessed car. It's not. It's one of the Lowmen's cars from the Dark Tower series. It's a creature. It's a living creature. So
yeah.
it's not even the same thing. So there was a lot of people when that book came out that King is cannibalizing himself. He doesn't have any new ideas. Like it's read the book. The two are
Yeah,
nothing.
From a Buick 8 is I love From a Buick 8.
Mhm.
Though I only read it once and I really need to reread it. And I'm gonna
Yeah,
hopefully do
same.
that this year.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make summer like the summer of King because that's when I take a break from doing podcasts.
Mhm.
So I'm just gonna like listen to a bunch of uh Stephen King audiobooks
Yeah.
during
Yeah.
the summer.
I want to
Uh,
reread 11/22/63 because there's a whole section in there which is almost like a sequel to it, or maybe not a sequel, more like an epilogue to it because it takes place um, like a month after the kids defeat the clown for the first time, defeat Pennywise for the first time. So I liked that. It was like, hey, here's what Derry was like a month after the Pennywise, the clown went into hibernation when they thought that they had killed it. And it's a great story. It's ostensibly it's a science fiction story, but it's really a love story. And
Yeah.
I remember really liking it. It's my wife's favorite book of Stephen King. She loves that book. And as I recall, I watched the adaptation, and I think the adaptation was pretty good. They made some changes, but I remember enjoying it. The miniseries, but I'd like to read the book again. But it's just so big, right? And I'm a slow reader, so it's just like, that's a big investment when I'm trying to read newer books.
Yeah.
I got that to be read pile. It's just towering.
11/22/63 is a book I have not read yet, but it's a book I plan on reading this year too. I need to catch up because all the Stephen King podcasts that I listen to, everyone's read this book and everyone goes on about how good it is. And I want to read it just for the part.
It's a big chunk. It's a good healthy section, and I was really because I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
And it was, and it's very organic. It's not like he wedged it in there. It's very natural for that section to be in there. And I mean, the other one that I would recommend if you haven't read it was Revival, one of his more recent books. Fantastic. Cosmic Menace, one of his most brutal endings in years. Loved it. Absolutely.
I've read that one. Yeah, that one. The ending really, wow. Geez, talk about
you read that ending, you're like, oh, he went there. He went there.
That's got to be his bleakest ending yet.
Yep. With a great, I mean, obviously we won't spoil it, but it's also got one of those great last lines where it's like, oh, it was just like no hope. It was just, you're just gonna go completely dark. It was just like, King still got it. Don't even tell me he got old, he got nostalgic, or he was like, no, he still got it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he can roll out the darkness when he wants to.
Yep.
So this next question, so far everyone's answered one way, and I'm the only one who's answered the other way. I'm thinking of switching my answer because there's obviously something wrong with me. So would you rather read only King novels or his shorter works for the rest of your life?
Ooh, jeez, that's a tough one. Like as a writer, and there is some weight to this. They say, I've heard a lot of people, even some editors, have said that in their mind, like horror fiction works best as in the short story form. Like that's its most potent, purest form. That the longer it is, the more comfortable you get with either the setting, the monster, whatever. And once you get comfortable with it, the fear goes away. So horror in its purest form is in small doses in short stories. But if we're talking specifically Stephen King, I'd have to go novels because I'm thinking, I love living in his world. I love getting to know these characters. So I guess it's just like, I guess it depends on what I'm enjoying. If I'm enjoying the pure scare, and that's what I was reading it for, and all I want is to be scared or to be disturbed or unsettled, then yeah, I would say like the short fiction. There's a lot of really powerful short stories, but you're just gut punches, or he just stabs that knife in and twists it. He's very good at that, especially with those last few lines of some of his stories. But if I'm going for enjoyment, and I really want to sort of luxuriate in his work, I mean, I would go with novels because you can just get lost in those books, So I realize that's kind of a cop-out answer.
No, it's not.
It really depends on what your goal is.
Yeah. When I answered this question, I said short stories because there's more of them. But every time I ask this question, people say novels. And and you know what, their answers have convinced me that I think I'm wrong, because even as novels have stories within stories within stories, they're like onions often, right? But you also get that gut punch like you're talking about. He's able to take his time with the characters, and you don't really fall in love with his short story characters, right? But you do kind of fall for his novels, the characters in his novels. So
well, the good thing is that you said, like, you pick short stories because there's so many of them. At least with someone like Stephen King, he also wrote a hell of a lot of novels. It's not like he only wrote 10 novels, right? The guy wrote
it's like I think he's up to 80 now or 70 or something like that. Yeah.
So you still have a lot to go through, even if
you're right. Yeah, and a lot of them are like door stoppers, so you'd be reading for a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love all this stuff. Like he's definitely someone who I sort of revisit, and I've definitely got my favorites. I try to reread The Stand every few years. I've definitely read it several times. Just like I love going back and discovering new things, either because I don't remember it, or maybe I was younger and I was never one who skipped. Even when I was a kid, I would have only skipped because I didn't understand it or I wasn't following it. But it's with those big books. I mean, I think like anyone's big books, but we're talking specifically about King. You discover new things every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a favorite short story or novella by Stephen King?
Ooh, you know what? I would say favorite novella, no contest, The Mist. I love The Mist. It is
That's
just
a good
so
one.
bleak. There's also, again, there's the spiders in it. I think are terrifying. I'm terrified of spiders, so I love that. He basically, again, it's almost like a Blacklands kind of a story. There might have been some Blacklands influence there, where you've got this Arrowhead project, you know, opens this dimensional rift, and all these horrible creatures come out. So, I mean, when people have asked me, you know, for influence for the Blacklands, I've never actually ever said The Mist, but now that I'm talking about it, it might have sort of been a subconscious influence. Say, hey, you got this thing, and these, you know, this mist is spreading, and these creatures are also spreading, and you had the melting pot of the people in the supermarket, and how you know, this microcosm of society, and how it sort of breaks down to the point where they would finally start sacrificing people to appease what they think is God in the mist. So I really like that. And I think, on the other hand, something that's really heartfelt, that really shows his character and shows his breadth as an author, would be The Body. I think those two, in terms of, you know, novellas, I would say The Mist on one hand, pure, unadulterated horror, which ends on a bit of a hopeful note, but still pretty bleak. And then The Body, which I just, you know, I was almost in tears. I can remember, even right now, I know the last couple of lines, and just powerful. You know, like when you see the Gordy LaChance as an adult, and he's gone back to Castle Rock, he's visiting his dad, and he sees Ace Merrill going into a bar, and he's like, all my friends are dead, but Ace is still alive. You know, Ace is right there. And then he said, you know, like the bridge over the river is still there, but the river's kind of small, but it's still there. And then it says, so am I. And that's the last line. I was like, oh, just right to the heart. It was just like, he's like, with so am I. It was just like great, powerful, you know.
Regarding The Mist, I cannot pass up the opportunity. Every time you see fog outside, I'm like, there's something in the mist. There's something in the mist. The Body, though, that's a great one. Yeah. What did you think of the adaptation?
Stand By Me? Oh yeah, I loved it. Yeah, Stand By Me was great. I mean, it's a classic, right? I don't know if it was, I would know, it definitely wasn't the very first of the good ones. There was a lot of bad Stephen King adaptations made in the 80s, but Carrie, I think, was the first, and Carrie's great. I mean, it's De Palma. It's got a great cast. Even the supporting cast, you got people like PJ Souls, and I can't remember the actress who plays the gym teacher. But a great cast of characters. Everyone always focuses on Sissy Spacek, understandably so, because she's fantastic. But it's one of these movies that has a great cast and great look to it. But yeah, Stand By Me was one that I just, those kids, and Rob Reiner, you know, great director. It was like one of those things where I just feel like a lot of things combined at the same time. I don't really understand why they changed the location to, I think it's Oregon. It's like Castle Rock, Oregon, or something.
They do that often.
I'm sure there's a reason for that, but I'm not sure it's a good reason.
Yeah, it's weird that they do that, but Stand By Me, I think, I can't remember the first like Stephen King adaptation I watched as a kid, but I'm pretty sure Stand By Me was it.
Right.
And I loved it, you know. But you know, back then I didn't think of Stephen King as an entity. It was just a movie, right? And then later on I was introduced to Stephen King by other means. Like is the movie covers, like for Carrie, that scared me.
Oh yeah. Well, and again, it was one of these things where horror owes so much to King, not just the books and the films, but like he was just like a mountain, you know. He was like this presence there, like you said, like it was influencing everything from book covers, you know, like it was just, people would associate with him. And I don't think there's really been anyone since then who's had that kind of a presence in the field, you know. Like you've got people who've done well in horror, actors and writers and filmmakers and such, but King's been the biggest. You know, I don't think anyone before or since has been like, you know, his kids have done well, obviously, but King is still the King.
Yeah. And nobody has his brain power.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I saw him on Celebrity Jeopardy one time. It was him, David Duchovny, and I think Vanessa Redgrave, and he just smoked them. Like he's a very smart person. Like I don't know if he's got he's obviously very smart, but I also feel like he's kind of gotten like an eidetic memory. I feel like he probably remembers everything that he reads. Got like a photographic because he just smoked everyone. And Duchovny, I remember, did very well. Like Duchovny is like a college educated guy. He went to Yale where he went into acting. And so he held his own for a little bit, and then King just smoked them all. And he just knew everything. He just sports, geography, politics, all this stuff. It was just effortless. He was just always chiming in. It was just like it just made me feel like, oh, this is how he's able to write this stuff. He just remembers everything.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. Stephen King doesn't just write horror, though. He writes in a lot of different genres, especially these days. But every book, even in his horror books, there's always like something else new that he's tackling that you haven't read before, like a subgenre or whatnot. But he's written in so many different subgenres, sort of like the story we're going to be discussing very soon. I Am the Doorway. You could say space horror, cosmic horror. What has King failed? Has King failed to write a story in perhaps a subgenre you would like to see him write in?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, he's done literary fiction. I remember with Everything's Eventual, had collected a bunch of. Remember, he was publishing all those short stories in the New Yorker at the time.
Yeah,
there's a lot of literary fiction in there, or stuff that was very, very lightly supernatural. You could even argue that he's written feminist fiction, if a man is allowed to write that. I'm not sure if, but he has. I mean, when you look at stuff like Dolores Claiborne or Gerald's Game, he went through a period when he was writing a lot of very strong. And again, not just female led, but those are very strongly feminist, deal with very strong feminist themes, which I feel like he did very well with. I'm not sure if that was in response to maybe only writing about Ben for a while and he wanted to try and change things. But I mean, other than saying outright like romance, or I don't know that there's not really a genre that he hasn't really tackled. He's done Westerns. He's even done sort of fantasy Westerns. He's done weird Westerns. He's done detective fiction. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe historical. I don't know if he's really done any kind of historical fiction.
Yeah, he does bridge that gap here and there, but not fully.
Yeah, not in the way that we think of, like, say, historical fiction that people are doing today. But yeah.
For me, my answer is I would like he's done it. There's two stories that you could consider space horror, and this is one of them. I Am the Doorway.
Yeah, well, I remember there was a quote from him where he says, like, it's really funny because he's like, the idea of me writing like a hard science fiction story is a joke. He goes, I got C's and D's in science in school, and so it's like, but it's like, yeah, it's like, I think he started selling himself short. I would actually, I think he just doesn't want to.
No, probably not. But I would love to see like
technology, like his stories are character driven. Like even the stuff that is nominally science fiction.
Yeah,
it's really just to say it's like we'll talk about I Am the Doorway, and some people could say, oh, well, it deals with these astronauts who went to Venus. It was like, yeah, just because they went to Venus doesn't make this a science fiction story any more than the film Alien. Alien is not a science fiction movie. It's a horror movie with a science fiction setting, but I mean, it's using all of the tropes and trappings of horror cinema. It's a horror movie. Just because it's on a spaceship instead of a haunted house doesn't make it a science fiction movie.
yeah.
In my opinion, but
no, I would agree.
Open for debate.
I would say they're more science fiction than just say some of the science fiction that passes in books these days when it's more fantasy. You know what I mean? But
I think science fiction at its core is and again, I'm not religious about this, but ironically, pun not intended. But I think science fiction is about ideas, and King's ideas that are sort of science fiction-esque are not about ideas. When he comes up with something like The Jaunt, he's not coming up with, oh, here's this cool thing about teleportation. He's like, no. How awful could I make that technology? What's something really awful that I can do? So it's a vehicle for his story. He's not writing a story so he can talk about the wonders of teleportation.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, the whole reason he wrote a story like The Jaunt because he knew that he had that ending in mind.
Yeah.
I would be willing to bet money on that. It was.
Oh, I guarantee it. Yeah, because everything was built towards that in that story. Yeah. All right, so I think we've segued here into I Am the Doorway. Before we continue, though, I just want to read a short synopsis that I wrote down here about this story. So, I Am the Doorway is a story narrated by former astronaut named Arthur, who recounts a horrifying transformation he undergoes after a space mission to Venus. Years after his return to Earth, Arthur begins experiencing disturbing physical changes. Small eyes begin to appear on his hands, alien eyes that seem to see a completely different world. He comes to realize that his body has become a doorway for an alien species. These beings use him to observe and possibly manipulate the human world. Through these eyes, the aliens perceive humanity as grotesque and repulsive, and Arthur fears they are capable of influencing his actions. Now, I'm just gonna. Before I stop reading, there's one more thing here I want to read. It's an excerpt from the book. So this is from page. If you have the paperback like this, it's from page 99 to 100. And this is their trip to Venus. Like, this is while they're there. The cloud cover is equal parts methane, ammonia, dust, and flying shit. I like that. And flying shit. The whole planet looks like the Grand Canyon in a wind tunnel. Corey estimated wind speed at about 600 miles per hour near the surface. Our probe beeped all the way down and then went out with a squawk. There's no vegetation and no sign of life. A spectroscope indicated only traces of the valuable minerals. And that was Venus. Nothing but nothing, except it scared me. It was like a circle, or it was like circling a haunted house in the middle of deep space. I know how unscientific that sounds, but I was scared gutless until we got out of there. I think if our rockets hadn't have gone off, I would have cut my own throat on the way down. It's not like the moon. The moon is desolate, but somehow antiseptic. That world we saw was utterly unlike anything anyone has ever seen. Maybe it's a good thing that cloud cover is there. It's like a skull that's been picked clean. That's the closest I can get. Now that is one hell of a description. And
even before I reread the story, I remembered the description of a haunted house in space. I vividly remember that because, again, it's a collection that I've revisited a few times. It's been a while, but again, a story like I Am the Doorway stands out because, like you said, he didn't write a lot of stories that were like that, science fiction adjacent, cosmic menace, that sort of thing. But I remembered that description of Venus as like a haunted house in space. That really stuck with me.
Yeah, I like when he comes back home. It's like 3 or 4 years later when he starts developing these weird eyes in his fingertips and his fingers. And it's also like the original book cover, which isn't this one.
Right. Yeah. And I have that. I've got the original one with the hand. Because again, it was one of those things that was very vivid, right? Like it's for a kid who probably, a lot of other kids weren't reading that stuff. And regardless of what I was absorbing from the stories themselves with my preteen mind, I remember those covers, man. The foil, some of them the cover inside the cover, like that's part of my childhood. Like a lot of people who grew up in the 70s or the 80s, those were the books. They all had that stuff, right?
Yeah. Do you remember your first reaction when reading Arthur's Hands and the eyes?
Oh yeah, it was one of those things where I think with King I was really used to different monsters. Like, oh, this is going to be a vampire story. This is going to be one about giant, like killer rats. And this was, I don't know if it was first, but I mean, it's his first collection. So I would say it's probably at least one of, if not the first kind of a body horror story. And I mean, we're Canadian. So I mean, a lot of the stuff that I grew up with first and I was watching first was Cronenberg, who pretty much defined body horror, right? At least in terms of cinema. So when I saw King doing this with this guy's hands and then what ends up happening to him, it was like, oh, like this would be great. I probably as a kid I was thinking, oh, Stephen King or David Cronenberg should adapt this and turn this into a movie. This is definitely his wheelhouse, which is funny because then he goes and does The Dead Zone a few years later, which is not a body horror movie at all. And it's a great movie. But I always thought it was kind of funny that out of all King stuff, that's the one he chose to adapt.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You,
great story. I vividly recall being really freaked out with the hands. Again, he's just really good with knowing where those pressure points are on a
yeah,
person and how to scare you. You know, like you use your hands all the time, right? So what
yeah,
if something invaded your hands and they were no longer your own?
yeah. And like the hands have an effect on his emotions too, because there's something happening there. But I want to go back a little bit. We should mention that on their return to Earth, they have an issue with the landing,
Mhm.
and I think it's like their parachute doesn't go off or something
Yep.
like that, and so they come crashing into the ocean. And I think his name is Corey, who's
Right.
with them, doesn't survive,
Mhm.
and so he almost dies. He's Arthur, that's his name, right? Arthur, yeah.
Yep.
He almost dies, and he's in a wheelchair now.
Mhm.
So um, it's easy to see how that would have affected him alone. Like there's some parallels here, I think, where you could almost say that this is a story about PTSD.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, it was, and I think the he's telling this story to someone that one of his friends who also lives on Caroline Key, I think is where he is, somewhere in the Keys. Obviously, I think it's a fictional place. I don't think there is a Caroline Key in the Florida, but it's where he is. He watches the rockets going off from the Gulf and everything, and he's telling the story to his friend, and the friend doesn't believe him, right? Because he has the hands always wrapped in bandages, and so the friend might have been thinking, yeah, you went through this traumatic thing. You obviously still feel a connection to it because you moved down here so you could watch the rockets going off. Um, and if there's one thing about trauma, it's just like some people can't help but be near it. You know, it's there's an addictive quality to trauma. You think he would want to be as far away from the rockets launching as he could be, but he isn't. So I think that there are absolute parallels to. I mean, if he actually, you know, King himself could have actually played a little loose, and we might not have known there was a real physical or an alien component to this until later in the story. And you might have thought that he was actually maybe it was just PTSD, and this guy is making this stuff up. But it's a short story; you don't really have that kind of time.
Hmm.
And I think, you know, when I reread the story, I think you know pretty quickly that it's not purely PTSD. This guy actually did bring something back from him, whether it was from deep space or from being in that close proximity to Venus itself.
Yeah. I think it's proven near the end that what he's going through is real.
Yeah.
There's he because he keeps his hands bandaged up. So
Mm.
because when he like when they're unbound, he can that's when they see. And you know what? That's something I want to get to here, because I have another excerpt here of what happens when his hands are unbound. And it's really interesting. This is like my favorite part of this short story. So he's trying to read a book here in this scene. He says, "I leaned back and closed my eyes. I could hear the old ship's clock ticking on the shelf across the room. There was a high, thin drone of a jet on its way to Miami." It's things like that I love about King's writing, right? Like we all notice these things,
Yeah, the
but
details.
we don't necessarily remember them.
Mm.
And there was the soft whisper of my own breath. I was still looking at the book. The realization crept on me, then sank home with a frightening rush. My eyes were closed, but I was still looking at the book. What I was seeing was smeary and monstrous, the distorted fourth dimensional counterpart of a book, yet unmistakable for all that. And I was not the only one watching. That's spooky right there, right?
It's great.
I snapped my eyes open, feeling the constriction of my heart. The sensation subsided a little, but not entirely. I was looking at the book, seeing the print and the diagrams with my own eyes, perfectly normal, everyday experience. And I was also seeing it from a different lower angle, and seeing it with the other eyes, seeing not a book but an alien thing, something of monstrous shape and ominous intent. I raised my hand slowly to my face, catching an eerie vision of my living room, and oh, sorry, catching an eerie vision of my living room turned into a horror house. I screamed. There were eyes peering up at me through splits in the flesh of my fingers, and even as I watched, the flesh was dilating, retreating, as they pushed their mindless way up to the surface. but that was not what made me scream. I looked into my own face and seen a monster.
Mhm.
So
So good.
he's seeing himself through the eyes of the aliens, and
Mhm.
how, and this is an interesting part of the story, because the aliens, they don't take kindly to what they're seeing with us.
Yeah, it's hard to tell if like are they just afraid because like if we were looking, if we were seeing them, would we have the same reaction, or do they have this ill intent? And I think that's something that I've always loved about Cosmic Menace. I mean, the best Cosmic Menace stories, they treat aliens as alien. Like it's just their very reactions are alien. We might look, we might say, oh, it's hate or it's fear, but those are human emotions. That's how we quantify these things. It's not necessarily what they are seeing. The reaction can be completely justified because these things are new and different, and therefore they're afraid of them, or they could actually have ill intent. And that's sort of what I also love about that story is the mystery. You don't really know where this came from. Even Arthur himself says, was it from Venus or was it just from floating through space? Was it from some random thing they passed through on the way to Venus? You don't really know. You don't need to know, but
Mm-hmm.
you also don't really know what the intent of these aliens are, except that they want to look through. They want to see through him. They've accessed his body, and I feel like, and they can control his body, but like for what purpose? Like is it they're using them as like a peripheral? Is he like a human drone? You don't really get enough of that information by the end of the story to really know. But
Yeah.
that's what makes it terrifying.
I think there are aspects of like an unreliable narrator here, though, because like when we meet Arthur in the present time, he's talking to, I believe it's Richard,
Mm.
and he's telling him how the hands kind of killed a boy.
Right.
Like they made his head explode, which is crazy. And so he buried the kid, and so they later go out and dig for the boy, and Richard's doing the digging, and they don't find anything, and he's like, well, they must have, he keeps saying, I am the doorway
Mhm.
being him for these aliens to do things. And he's like, they must have like removed the body or moved the body while I was sleeping. So, and they're like, and he's like, how can they do that? You're in a wheelchair.
Right.
But he goes on saying, well, just because, a truck doesn't move on its own until you step in and drive it. So when they step into me and drive me while I'm sleeping, they might be able to make my legs move.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's like, we're sitting there like, really, Arthur?
Well, it's like he always has this answer, and it's like, yeah, it might end up actually being true. But if you were hearing that from someone else, you're like, yeah, yeah, sure. And if it's not that, it's going to be the leprechauns, right? If it's not the aliens, it's the
Yeah, yeah.
leprechauns.
But I love that Stephen King put that in there, because like I said, later on you see the hands unravel, and Richard is the one who sees the eyeballs in his hand, so they're there. But I think they're driving him insane too, so maybe he didn't see what he thought he saw with that boy. But then
Yeah,
again, we do learn later that there is a boy who did go missing in the village nearby.
yeah. Well, and I think that those are those realistic details that I think really sell. I think Stephen King understands that when you're telling any kind of fantasy story, and horror is just another type of fantasy, it's stuff that's not real. Um, the best way to sell it is to make everything else as real as possible. So you make
Hmm.
the real, and that's what I've tried to do in my fiction. I'm not saying as good as Stephen King, but that's the lesson that I learned. It wasn't about how to write a vampire, how to write a ghost. I can do that on my own. I can do that fine. But I think to sell the drama, to sell the scary, um, you have to surround it, with realism. And I think that's what sort of it disarms people. Their defenses come down, and that's what you want to do. You want to make them comfortable. I just watched the movie that everyone's talking about right now, Sinners, which is fantastic. It's as great as everyone says. Everyone should go see it in a theater, and it's like it's a horror movie, and I don't think anything horror happens for like the first 45 minutes to an hour of this movie. And the movie's over 2.5 hours, 2 hours. I think it's 2 hours and 17 minutes. And you don't feel like, hey, welcome. Where's the scary stuff happening? You're just invested in these characters. You're introduced to all these people, the town, these two brothers who have come back after working in Chicago for the mob, and you're just invested. Like I almost forgot that I was in a horror movie. It's like I don't even care if they get to the horror stuff. I want to see more with these people. Good director, good writer. So I think Stephen King has the same thing where I'm going to tell a vampire story, and we'll get to the vampire eventually. But first, I'm going to take, this ordinary event. I'm going to introduce you to these really cool people. You may not like all of them, but they're going to feel real to you. And then when stuff starts going sideways, you're going to be invested in them. Again, you don't have to like them, but you don't have to like these people to be invested in them, because no one's invested in the vampire. The vampire is terrifying. It's going to rip your lungs out. And I think that's just something he's always been really, really, really adept at doing, is taking ordinary things, ordinary people, ordinary situations, and then dipping them in the supernatural before you even really realize it. And then it's like, oh my gosh, we can't get out of this now. Now we're in a horror story. How the hell do we get out? And how many of us are going to get out alive?
Yeah. Do you think there's definitely a certain amount of ambiguity in this story? Do you think that sort of lends to the realism? Because if something like this were to happen, there would be no way that we would know all the details.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is a character he's being watched by naval intelligence, right? Like, he has to go see this Navy guy every year to make sure he hasn't given up any secrets, because it's just like, while he was working in this, he was exposed to all kinds of classified stuff. So he has to make sure, if he has to go and he meets this guy in Miami, he has to sign a paper. No, I have not divulged anything, blah, blah, blah. So it's just like, there's a part of him that, if I show this stuff to these people, if I unwrap the bandages for this guy, they're going to have me in a lab for the rest of my life. They're going to be studying me, right?
Yeah.
So I think that King is just very, very good at making these things seem really realistic. So you kind of are almost on Arthur's side, keeping this a secret. He knows this is awful. It's like a plague. It's like a sickness. It's something that's, again, this is the body horror element to it, but it's not benign. It's not just happening to him. He's killed this boy, or he thinks that he's killed this boy at first, but you don't really know. And then he decides to tell his friend, but he doesn't really want to tell his friend because he's worried what might happen to his friend if the eyes see him. There's a reason why he's keeping his hands bandaged, right? He is the doorway. Having the bandages on is him keeping that doorway closed, and I think even he knows that he can't do that forever.
Yeah. How do you feel, King? We kind of brushed on this, but this is something. One reason why I'm doing this podcast is I want to make my own writing better, right? And I want to make my prose better. So even though we've discussed this a little bit, how do you think King uses his prose to build tension like he does in this book, in this story?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's just I always sort of wonder, like, how much of it is natural, like how much I'd like to look at. It's one of these authors where I'd love to see what his first draft looks like before he touches anything, and how much of the story is there. I'm willing to bet most of it is probably there, and him going back. I think he's even said in his book on writing that your second draft is basically your first draft minus 10%. Because your first draft you tend to overwrite, over-explain, repeat yourself. And he's right. When I go back and rewrite my stuff, it's usually just omitting needless words. Here's a description that doesn't need to be there. Here's something that I've said twice or three times. Chop out the other two times, leave it once. So for me, it's it's hard to say. I would only be speculating based on how I write. I don't know. I would love to know.
yeah.
That's all I can say about that one. It's just again, I think because he's such a natural storyteller, it's hard to know what he starts with, right? We're only seeing the finished product, right? That we're after. It's been through him, who's obviously a very good writer and an editor, but it's also been through other people. He's probably got beta readers. He's got an editor, obviously, before the book was published.
Yeah, I just read what I found to be completely creepy or unnerving. Were there any moments for you that you felt were particularly creepy or unnerving?
Unnerving?
Yeah, unnerving.
I think it's the scene when what's his buddy's name? The sort of the beach bum with the dune boogie. I can't remember his name. When he's telling who Arthur's telling the story to. When he dies, not that I don't know if we're allowed to tell spoilers here. Spoiler alert.
Oh no, we're full spoilers here.
Yeah. I was going to say this book's 50 years old, so I think we're okay. But yeah, I think when you actually see, I mean, he talked about the boy dying, but you didn't see it. It's already happened by the time the story starts. So when you actually see the power that this alien influence has, it's not just being able to control his body and activate parts of it that have been damaged from the crash. this alien intelligence is able to assert an external influence on the world, like brings down lightning and literally shocks this guy to death, and that's terrifying, right? So I mean, this isn't. I think for me, it was like, yeah, you're gonna probably have to do more in the long run than wrapping bandages around your hands to stop this thing.
Yeah.
And I think even he knows that, because when he goes home and takes care of his hands, and then you get that great sort of stinger at the end, it's like, yeah, you are the doorway, and you always will be. You're not going to be able to stop this. You can keep the door closed.
We can go into the end because he pretty much destroys his hand using fire.
Right.
And I think he loses his hands. Because it doesn't specifically say that, but he says he's able to like tie his shoes with the hooks.
With hooks,
and whatnot. But then at the very end, he's considering, or he's saying that he's going to blow his brains out with a shotgun. Mm-hmm. Because the eyes have returned on a circular patch on his chest.
Right.
I think that would make an awesome tattoo.
Oh yeah, exactly. And, you know, I wonder if there's got to be. I mean, King has got all these people who do tattoos and Stephen King related tattoos. There must be someone who's done they are the doorway. Yeah. I think you're kind of just asking for trouble there. Manifest destiny.
Oh, you know, I'm sure that there's some people who would be like, you know, I'll be a conduit. I'll do this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially in this community, right? I mean, you've got these people who are sort of,
great. Let's just say crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, we could say crazy. You know, let me put it this way: like, I live in Peterborough, and when the Trailer Park Boys were doing their sort of cross country tour, I liked Trailer Park Boys, so my wife and I went to go see it. Mm-hmm. And we were in the audience, and my wife just goes, you know, there's people here that don't realize they're actors. You know, like, it was just like a takeaway there. It was like there's people here that think this is real.
Yeah, that's so true.
Because they never break character. Even in interviews, they play themselves. Yeah. And so they were up there, and it was very funny with the reviews and very Canadian. But like, my wife just leans over and goes, there's people in this stadium that don't realize these guys are acting.
That's so true. Like, a lot of my friends growing up watching that stuff, they talked about it. At least they didn't necessarily say that, but the way they talked about it, it was like they believed everything that happened was like reality instead of it just being, you know, a show and scripted and whatnot.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to talk about how this story kind of relates to other Stephen King stories, because Stephen King does touch upon like more scientific, or not scientific, but science fiction type stuff. And a lot of those stories typically fail, like, or at least a lot of people think they fail, like Tommyknockers. Mm-hmm. So my question here is, in what way does I Am the Doorway compare to his later sci-fi / alien books like Dreamcatcher and the Tommyknockers? To answer my own question here, I think a lot of it has to do with being possessed by aliens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I Am the Doorway, it's very, like, a lot of the stories in Night Shift, they're very raw. You see a lot of young talent here. They're also very pulpy, I feel like. Like, he's going right for the jugular with these types of stories. Like, these were just pure, unadulterated King. You know, like, here's this setup. It's executed very quickly. Whereas, obviously, even just in terms of the story's breadth, you got a short story that's very short, even for Stephen King. So yeah, it's harder to compare it to something like Tommyknocker and Dreamcatcher, which are two, not just novels, but huge novels. They're actually very, very big. So I'm definitely not one of the people that doesn't like Tommyknockers. I can recognize that it's a little unwieldy, but I'm also a UFO guy. I like X-Files. I like, I like that kind of stuff. So I was all in on buried UFO in Maine, so I still liked it. I definitely don't feel like it's one of his weaker efforts. In Dreamcatcher, between the sort of the military aspect of it, because King always deals with these human characters. I really liked him actually doing that, but also showing the military cover-up side of it, which I was actually surprised that he was going to do that, and even getting into the minds of the alien intelligence itself. So like I like Dreamcatcher too, and then again, there's a really cool connection to it. So it's got all this great stuff in it for me. So as a fan of King and a fan of, say, Stephen King, it being one of my favorite novels, Dreamcatcher has got as much of a cool connection to that book as 11/22/63 does. So I feel like these books are definitely all kind of connected. And since that stuff is sort of like my wheelhouse, because I loved, X-Files and all that kind of UFO stuff in the 90s, I really dug Dreamcatcher. I think a lot of people who might not like it, it might just be because of those scientific undertones. They expect straight horror from Stephen King, and this is more sci-fi. Some people might obviously have genuine, negative feelings towards the book regardless. But I think for a lot of people who are just expecting something else, and then they're getting kind of ostensibly a science fiction horror story, they balk against the science fiction elements to it, I think.
Yeah. Also, Dreamcatcher is known for being Stephen King's recovery book from his accident. And quite honestly, I think he was writing that to amuse himself more than anything else. Because like he's got typical Stephen King humor in there, like with the farts and the shit weasels. I think honestly, I think that's what I think turns a lot of people off, because he goes for the throat with the
well, he's known for that kind of
Parasite
stuff. It's just that was definitely the most extreme. And then ironically, it's just like, even if you don't like that, I mean, that's also body horror to its extreme. I mean, it makes sense if it's a biological entity that's gestating inside you. It's sort of like the toilet humor, body horror version of, say, Alien, that you don't get from an Alien movie where, this thing is on you, it's gestating inside you, it's feeding off your organs. But you're not going to get that kind of humor or that kind of grossness in an Alien movie. I don't think you ever have. Whereas he was just like, no. Stephen King is like, no, if this is happening to your body, it's going to be doing all kinds of creepy and uncomfortable gastrointestinal things to you. And that's where he goes, right? So again, it's kind of, it's honest in that sense. But it's Stephen King's sort of silly fart joke wheelhouse, I guess we could say. Where he likes that kind of stuff, and it's just like, to me, it's sort of juvenile. It's not really gross out. It's just like, it just doesn't do anything for me. So it's like, all right, Stephen King, you're gonna make your silly juvenile 12-year-old boy fart joke. Just do your thing, I guess, and then get back to the aliens, please.
Honestly, I kind of liked Dreamcatcher. I read it when it came out. I got it for Christmas or something like that, and I read it right away. And I found the juvenile humor as funny. It didn't bother me at all, but the movie adaptation, oh god, that thing is an embarrassment.
The movie was like, and it's weird because I think like William Goldman, wrote the screenplay for that. He was written all this great stuff. Maybe I'm wrong. I think someone good directed it. But the movie's a mess. It's trying to be all these different things. It's trying to be Stand By Me with the flashback stuff with the kids. It's trying to be this other thing. The ending was a mess. And not to mention, you're also trying to compact a book that was huge. Like, to do it properly, I think it really needs to be like at least a 4-episode miniseries. Like, you've got TV now. If you're going to adapt a book that's big, let it breathe. Don't try and do this in an hour and a half or 2 hours. You can't. Not effectively. Where you're trying to get to know all these people. But we're in the golden age of streaming television right now. Do 3 episodes. Do 6. Do as much as you need without having trim the fat off. You don't want it to be too long, but let it breathe. You don't need to be doing a 2-hour movie.
Yeah. Also, I'm glad you mentioned that you don't hate the Tommyknockers like a lot of people do. I don't hate it either. I can see it for what it is, though. It is a bit of a mess, like some people say, but I don't think anyone thinks of it as like a mosaic type novel. When that's what it is. I think that's what he was going for. But it just doesn't. I guess it doesn't pay off in the end. But
I feel like it's because he has this setup with these 2 characters that I think people really like, and then he leaves those characters for a while, and then he suddenly gets back to those characters, and the ship is mostly dug up. And I don't know if that's what it is. I just remember when I was interested in the other characters, but there was a part of me that was like, go back to the UFO. I want to see them digging up the UFO. And they leave that for a part to sort of say, here's how it's affecting the town. This influence that's affecting everyone. And it's sort of like, it's like this radiation that's now, been set loose because the metal's oxidizing or whatever. And this influence is changing everyone. So I liked it. But I remember I kept thinking, let's get back to Bobby and Gardner, and let's
me too. That was my favorite part, Bobby and Gardner, and we do go away from them. When we go back to them, they're not nearly as interesting as they were in that first part.
The sister scoops it. I think by the time we get back, we get Bobby's wonderfully awful sister. But by then, I mean, Bobby's pretty much transformed. Gardner's gone back to being full drunk. And it's just like now it's the third act, and you're really setting up for this thing when the UFO kind of comes out and the whole town gets sort of destroyed. And again, that's its own level of amusement. With the killer Coke machine is like probably one of my favorite parts of that ending.
Yeah.
But it was just it's unwieldy. It's kind of a mess. But I've read. That's not a bad book. I've read way worse books than that. I was still enjoying it. I still read it.
It's incredible to me that he can write books like that while he's completely off his because that was at the very end of his addiction
Yep.
cycle. Um, he was a mess. Yet he writes like, let's look at this book and take somebody else uh like me, for example. There's no possible way in hell I could
Mhm.
write a book that detailed.
Well, the fact that he was
Well,
doing anything, the like
yeah,
when I think of people who are in the throes of drug or alcohol addiction, I don't picture them really doing anything, and he's there just
exactly, yeah.
writing his ass off. I'm not saying that it was good. Obviously, it would have killed him, and it was destroying his relationship
Oh
with his
yeah, no,
family and
no.
friends. But
It
he
just
wasn't.
amazes me that he could do that.
Yeah, he wasn't sitting in a room shooting up, like and just sitting there watching the ceiling. This guy was working. He was probably more prolific then, and it's not like he really stopped. I mean, he was he's still pretty prolific now for a guy who's in his late 70s, I think. Or maybe
Yeah.
is he even 80 yet? I'm not sure, but
And he's 77, I believe.
right, yeah. But I mean, still, I think that when I read the New York Times interview with the whole King family, and the, Owen and Joe were talking about how they learned when they decided they were going to be writers, they learned early on to stop comparing them, even for themselves, stop comparing ourselves to our dad because they said like very lovingly, like our dad's kind of a freak. There's no one really like him, and he's forgotten more about writing than we'll ever learn. So it's just like you have to stop those comparisons for even like that. Like even someone like Joe Hill, who's done very well for himself, um, he releases a new novel like every 4 or 5 years. You
Yeah.
know, King releases one book, if not two, a year, and
Yeah.
he's been doing that steadily since he started. So he's a machine. There's just no one's going to be like him ever. It's just you just can't explain it.
Yeah. I'm
Even his
glad we
kids.
I'm glad we have him though, because
Absolutely,
he's
absolutely, and he's a nice
inspired.
guy. He seems
Yeah.
like a good guy. He's got a good sense of humor. He's got a good heart. Donates lots of time and money to all kinds of great causes. Um, yeah, he's the kind of person where it's just like I'd love to meet him, not to ask him anything about writing or anything. I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't because I think everyone was asking him this stuff or asking him for favors. I just like to shake his hand and say like, thanks for everything. And I'd probably tell him the story about my childhood and my mom who loved him to death, and that was the reason why. I would tell him something personal so that he would know that personal meaning that he has for me. I think that's what I would ever tell him if I ever had the chance to meet him.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think I would do the same. Like, why talk about writing when you can just maybe have a conversation about baseball or
Yeah,
something?
well, he's heard it all
Or
before, right? Like,
yeah.
this is my favorite book, and like I'm an author too. Like, I wouldn't even tell him I'm an author. He
Uh-huh.
hears that so much. I just, it's not about me. It's just
Yeah.
about being able to say, hey, I just want to shake your hand and say thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the great books.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're near the end of this story here. Before we stop, though, what was it that you liked most about "I Am the Doorway"?
Ooh, it's got to be the ending. Like I love the fact that Stephen King hasn't done a lot of stories that are sort of that deal with science fictional components. At least, again, I wouldn't call it a science fiction story, but when has he ever written about an astronaut? Much less an
Mhm.
astronaut going to Venus. I don't think he's ever done that before or since. So I like that. That really stood out to me. Um, uh, and then that ending, that last line with yeah, I remember that about using the hooks to tie his shoes, and I should be able to get the shotgun in my mouth
Yeah.
because the eyes have returned on my chest. It's just a great pulpy stinger where it's just like, oh man, you can't cut that off,
Hmm.
you can't remove that,
Yeah.
and you just wonder if he's gonna. And again, you don't know if he's gonna be able to do it. Like is he actually gonna be able, or are they gonna stop him?
Yeah.
So it's, obviously the story ends with him doing this because he's also using the hooks to type his story. He's telling us
Yeah.
to type the story. So
Yeah.
obviously we don't know, was he able to accomplish it, and if he didn't, then he's definitely in the doorway, and who knows what the hell came through.
Yeah. I love that ending too. My favorite part though is just the mystery of it. What
Hmm.
exactly is going on? What are these aliens, and what do they want exactly? And how are they doing this to him? And just like I don't want the answers to that. I want my brain to like sort of run away with that on its own,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
because
Well, that's
that's
the best
where
part about Cosmic Menace, right? The best part about the Cosmic Menace isn't the menace part. The fact that it's cosmic, you don't know what their motivations are, right?
yeah.
We assume that they're bad, or at least they're bad by our reasoning. But it's just like when we think about alien, the very meaning of that word is great because it's alien. Like we can't compare them to anything that we know, that we think, or that we feel. It's completely different, you know.
Do you have anything that you didn't like about this story?
No, I don't think
No?
so. I reread it again on Friday, and it's just powerful. It's just potent, you know. Like
It is,
it's
yeah.
one of his shorter stories. It's stripped bare. It's what I liked. What I was really struck by was he must have been fairly young. I'm guessing probably in his 20s when he wrote that. And it's just masterful. This was a guy who he really had the tools already there. It was just a matter of honing those tools. But the talent is just pure. It's just the way he's able to do a description in a couple of paragraphs. You could just study that in an English class and be like, look at this paragraph. There's 2 paragraphs where he just talks about where he lives, and that's all you ever get. Everything else is just the rest of the story. But in those 2 paragraphs, you know everything. You can immediately picture where he is on the Keys. You can feel the sand under your feet. He's just able to put in those little, like you said, those little details to create a huge picture in your mind, you know. So that was what really struck me. Was it's actually quite minimalist for a guy who gets accused of overwriting and writing books that are too long. Go and read Night Shift. Go read any of those stories in that book. They're all pretty short, you know, compared to some of the rest of his library.
Yeah. My biggest complaint, honestly, is just that it was. You mentioned it. You said it's very short. It's only like I forget, like 20 pages or something like that. I wish that it was longer. I wish that we could have explored what was going on. Not, like I said, I don't want answers, but I would have liked more situations and more creepiness in that respect. I would have liked to have explored what was going on just a little bit longer. Even like into a novel length. I'm not too sure how you would have adapted this or made it into a novel, but it would have been an interesting novel in my opinion, and that would have scratched my space horror itch by Stephen King.
Or even just a little glimpse. Like, how about a scene when he doesn't know what's going on, say he's in the bathroom and he sort of presses that hand up against a mirror, and the eyes are looking back to the eyes, and for a split second he gets a glimpse into their world, some world that looks horrible.
Yeah, exactly.
Planet. Yeah. And like just a little glimpse to see. You don't get to see what they look like because he's looking back through their eyes, but sees something just as horrific. It's like, oh, now I kind of get what they get. Our world is hell to them, and now I got a glimpse of their world. That would have been kind of cool.
I have to wonder, what was it like going to the bathroom for this guy and the aliens?
Exactly. I'm surprised. Well, knowing King with stuff like The Dreamcatcher, I'm surprised he didn't write that scene. You know?
He could have. That would have been awesome.
Definitely could have.
All right. So, all right. I think that's it. I want to thank you for joining me and discussing this short story. I Am the Doorway, with me, Ian, and you're coming back for at least one more, I think, on this book, if you're good with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I was wondering, before we go, do you have any upcoming releases, short stories or whatever that? Oh, you did mention that dual novellas. Do you have any release dates or anything that you can tell us?
Yeah, you know what? That's just one that I just finished, and like I said, I just passed it off to my agent, so I don't even know when that will be out. But I've got two new releases coming out. I've got a chapbook with Rapture Publishing that's called Fitted Sheet. Kind of like for, I wouldn't say younger audiences necessarily, it sort of skews a bit younger, but I wouldn't call it necessarily a children's story or even a young adult story. It just deals with a girl who sort of becomes a ghost and has this little adventure. It's a really cool kind of chapbook with some great artwork from Chris Panettiere.
Nice.
So that's out now. It's a limited. There's only 150 copies, and it's almost sold out. So you definitely want to check that out. And I think that's going to be shipping soon. I was just talking to Mitch Hull, who's the head honcho over there. Really great guy at Rapture, and I think they should be shipping soon if they're not already. And then my next novel, The Underwood, which is kind of like a woodsy apocalyptic thriller. I kind of think of it as the Blair Witch Project meets The Ring. So it would be my elevator pitch of that one. And that's shipping. Nice. It's May now, actually. I keep forgetting that it's May already. So that's shipping this month from Thunderstorm Books.
Wow. And what's that called again?
The Underwood.
The Underwood. Excellent.
Yeah, it's deluxe hardcover, so it's a bit more, it's a bit pricier, but yeah. And any of these deluxe hardcovers that I do, they're these gorgeous books. They're like the sports cars of books, right? They're obviously a bit more money.
Yeah.
I also try and find a home for them with other presses, so that there's always a mass market, an ebook, more affordable version. So that's the plan for some time down the road, that the Underwood will be available for people that can't afford the deluxe hardcover.
Excellent. And where can people find you online? And is there anything else you'd like to plug before leaving?
Yeah, well, those are the two books I think that people would check out if they're interested. As for where you can find me, got lots of websites. If you go to ianrogers.ca, that's my main website. If you go to theblacklands.com, that's my website devoted to my Blackland series. Even if you go to stuff like everyhouseishaunted.com, that's where I've got all the information for the movie that Sam Raimi is producing. So whenever there's updates, I sort of post it there, and there's some related stuff, some cool extras about the book and everything. And I'm on all the usual social media channels if you want to check me out. It's mostly cats and cocktails. I mean, you got to like that kind of stuff. That's pretty much all I post about, and books occasionally
Yeah.
books, but mostly cats and cocktails.
Yes, I like that. All right. Well, thank you, Ian, and we will talk to you again soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.